Divorce is always a lot of stress, not only for adults but also for children. They don't always understand what's going on, and their opinions are often very easy to manipulate. My wife is a cheater, and that's exactly what she did. I dragged myself into the laundromat on a typical gray Sunday morning at 7 a.m. I wasn't entirely sure if it was actually gray outside, but every Sunday feels like that when you're in a laundromat. I had only been using a laundromat for about a year. Before that, my wife used to do our laundry in the basement of our house. But I moved out a year ago, and 6 months later, my wife became my ex-wife, and the laundry room was now in my former home. My new routine involved going to a laundromat about a mile from my apartment early on Sunday mornings. While I didn't particularly enjoy getting up early or doing laundry, I didn't want this chore cutting into my weekend. So I got there early and left early, avoiding the rush, the wait for a machine, and the awkward small talk with other customers. After all, aren't Sunday mornings meant for recovering from hangovers and quietly reading the paper? I had been going to this same laundromat for about 9 months, and though I may have seen her before, I never really paid attention. But this time something was different. One of the wheels on the wagon she was pulling was bent, making it wobble as she tried to drag it inside. It was loaded with dirty clothes, and she struggled to pull it in with one hand while holding the door open with the other. Glancing up from my sports section, I decided to help out. I put the paper down and went over to hold the door for her, like any decent person would. She looked up at me, flashing a bright, radiant smile with big brown eyes and perfectly white teeth. "Thank you, mister," she said as she headed to a row of washers against the far wall. She was probably around 7 or 8 years old, maybe of mixed race or Hispanic, with long, curly brown hair. She was absolutely adorable. I turned back, expecting to see a parent following close behind, but there was no one. That's when I started to feel uneasy and curious. I watched as the little girl loaded the washer with all her clothes at once, not bothering to separate colors from whites, like I had always been taught. She pulled out some detergent from the wagon, fed the machine with coins, and hit the start button. Then she took out a small stuffed bear from the wagon, sat down in a chair, and quietly talked to it while the machine worked. From my seat, nearly across the laundromat, I could tell that her clothes, jeans, a long-sleeve shirt, and a pink jacket that seemed too light for the 20-degree morning, had seen better days. They weren't dirty, but they were worn and faded. She looked like she was just a step above being a street urchin, but the calmness about her didn't fit the picture. I also couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that a parent would send such a young child out alone to wash the family's clothes. As a parent myself, I knew something about this whole situation just didn't sit right. This brought my own situation to mind. Right now, my children were probably asleep, tucked into their warm, cozy beds in my former house. When they wake up, likely in an hour or two, their mother, my ex-wife, will probably have a hot breakfast ready for them, pancakes and eggs, or maybe some bacon. My 13-year-old son, Ethan, loves bacon, while my 15-year-old daughter, Haley, prefers pancakes. Waffles were always my favorite, but those happy Sunday morning breakfasts with the family are quickly becoming distant memories. As is typical in a divorce, my wife got custody of the kids, and though I have some visitation rights, she managed to turn them against me, blaming my selfishness for breaking up the family. My kids want nothing to do with me, and it's painfully clear during the rare times we spend together. My crime was that I did not accept my wife's affair with another man during a long weekend vacation with 3 other couples. The man she eventually left with was rich and had a habit of sleeping with other people's wives. They planned that she would spend just one night with him, after which she would return to me and be faithful to me for the rest of her life, as before. She stated that since she had warned me in advance, it was not treason. However, if I caused her any trouble, she would take half of everything I had, including the house, and deliberately ruin my relationship with our children, whom she also received. When I resisted, she did everything she could and blamed me for it. The children believed her completely. I found myself in a terrible situation. Reflecting on those family breakfasts made me hungry, as I hadn't eaten anything since the last bratwurst washed down with a Mickey's malt at the bar where I'd been watching the Knicks game. There was a sad excuse for a vending machine on one wall, next to a Coke machine. I was certain that whoever owned the laundromat collected money from both machines daily, or they'd have been broken into and vandalized long ago. I bought a pack of M&Ms and a Diet Coke. As I was reaching for the can, I noticed a little girl watching me. At first, I thought she was looking at me, but then I realized she was focused on my snacks. As a father myself, seeing the look on her face as she eyed my snacks tugged at my heartstrings. I approached her and asked if she would like my Diet Coke and M&Ms. Her face lit up, and she sat up straight in her chair. But then she looked sad and declined the offer. "Mommy says I'm not supposed to take food from strangers, especially men," she said. "That's a very good rule, sweetheart, and you should always listen to your mommy." I agreed. "Here's what I'll do. I'll leave the soda and M&Ms on the chair next to you. You can take them if you want. I'll get myself more and go back to my seat." I left the snacks on the chair, returned to the machines for another Diet Coke and bag of M&Ms, and went back to my seat, keeping an eye on her from behind my newspaper. About 5 minutes later, she picked up the soda and M&Ms and enjoyed them. I smiled to myself. I left about 90 minutes later after folding 2 loads of laundry and putting them in my car. As I departed, I didn't think about the child again, lost in my own thoughts about how I would spend the rest of my Sunday. I honestly didn't think about the child again until I arrived at the laundromat the following Sunday around 7 a.m. I wondered if she would be there again. Sure enough, about half an hour later, she came to the door, once more pulling a wagon stacked high with clothes. I held the door open for her again, and she thanked me as she made her way to the machines on the far wall. I noticed she was wearing the same clothes as the previous week. After she started her load, I approached her cautiously and took the seat next to her. "I noticed you have a problem with the back wheel on your wagon. Would it be all right if I took a look and tried to fix it?" She nodded while fiddling with her bear. I flipped the wagon over and saw that the back right wheel was bent on its axle. I straightened it out by hand, then rolled the wagon back and forth to test my repair. The wagon was fixed. My little friend seemed impressed. "I'm Alex Rogers, by the way," I said, extending my hand for a handshake. She offered her tiny hand with as much dignity as she could manage and said in a serious tone, "Maddie Ruiz." "Very glad to meet you, sir." "Well, now that we've introduced ourselves, we're not strangers anymore," I said. "How about we get a soda and some candy?" "Could I have a real Coke this week?" she asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Absolutely. 1 real Coke for you, a Diet for me, and some M&Ms for both of us." We sat and chatted for almost 2 hours. I went to my car, grabbed a notepad and pen, and taught her how to play tic-tac-toe. It only took her about 5 minutes to get the hang of it, and she became pretty good. I let her win a few times, just like I used to do with my kids. For a moment, I drifted into my own thoughts, remembering the times I played games with my children. Then my mind wandered back to the memory of my then-wife Tracy, looking me dead in the eye and telling me she was going to sleep with Robert Goldstein III, a big city lawyer, on the night my life as I knew it ended. It's just one night, Alex. It doesn't mean anything, it's just intimacy. What? Are you kidding me? It's not just intimacy, it's the end of our marriage, I shouted back. Don't be like that, Alex, she yelled. Don't throw away 18 years of marriage over one night. I didn't go behind your back like I could have. We could have done this and you probably wouldn't have known. Just let me have this, Alex. Tracy took Robert's hand and went off with him to the bedroom in the 4-room cottage. I stood there, stunned, for what felt like hours but was probably just a minute, before grabbing my things and leaving. Alex, it's your turn, Maddie said, snapping me back to the present. I placed an X in one of the side boxes, giving Maddie the chance to get 3 O's in a diagonal line for the win. She gave me her most triumphant look as she drew a line through her winning row. High five, kid, I said, raising my hand high above her reach. She looked at me sideways, then stood on her chair and stretched to reach my hand for the high five. Gotcha, she said. I stayed at the laundromat until Maddie's clothes were clean and folded. I offered her a ride home, but she declined, saying it was Mom's rules. Your mom sounds like a wise woman. I'd love to meet her sometime, I remarked. Maybe one day. She doesn't go out much, Maddie replied. As winter turned into spring and then summer, I continued this routine with Maddie. I began packing a small bag with a sandwich and snacks for both of us, and would buy the soda at the laundromat. I wasn't very hungry at that early hour, but I figured if I ate a sandwich, Maddie would eat one too, since she was quite thin. I eventually started bringing an extra sandwich, telling her it was for her mother. Maddie never objected and always thanked me. By then, she had mentioned she was 7 years old and would be starting 2nd grade at the local elementary school in the fall. There was no father in the picture. In fact, Maddie had never met him. Her mother did some part-time work outside the home while Maddie was at school, although Maddie wasn't sure what exactly her mother did. However, her mother was always home by the time Maddie got back from school. They mostly stayed in their apartment, occasionally going to the park if the weather was nice, and spent a lot of time watching TV. Maddie was familiar with almost all of the recent animated movies on the children's channels, though I couldn't name any of them. There didn't seem to be much money for extras, but her mother occasionally went out on dates on Saturday nights, leaving Maddie with instructions to go to bed by 9 p.m. Afterward, her mother would wake her up on Sunday mornings, give her money for 1 washing machine and 1 dryer, and send her off to the laundromat with her wagon. To be honest, my life at this stage wasn't much better than Maddie's, though at least I had enough money to get by. With child support, mortgage payments, and alimony draining my finances, my salary as a lead computer programmer didn't leave much for extras, usually just the occasional night out at a bar with some friends. I wasn't dating at all, and I didn't miss it. What I did miss were my kids, at least until I thought about how they treated me after Tracy and I split. I preferred to remember the happier times with them, but reality always seemed to come crashing in. "Where the hell are you?" Tracy screamed when I answered my phone at home the morning after leaving Robert Goldstein's lake house. The phone read 10:06. The last I knew, it was 2:13, and I was downing yet another shot of Eagle Rare bourbon. I must have finally staggered into the bedroom and passed out. "You've left me stranded at the lake house. How am I supposed to get home?" she yelled again. "Fuck you. Bitta. Have Robert Goldstein III drive you home." I hung up while she was still yelling. "Damn, you just can't hang up as dramatically with a cell phone as you could with a landline." In the past, I might have slammed the phone off the wall. The next Sunday, Maddie arrived at the laundromat about 15 minutes later than usual, and she wasn't carrying her usual cart of clothes. Her young face was streaked with tears, making me think she might have been robbed. She clutched her bear under her right arm. "Mommy didn't come home last night, and I don't have any money for the machines," she told me as I approached. "Does she sometimes not come home?" I asked as gently as possible. She shook her head, her large brown eyes brimming with tears. Mommy always comes home. That's one of her rules. I managed to calm her down and shared the food I had brought with me. I was uncertain about what to do next in this unfamiliar situation. Is there someone you can stay with until your mommy comes back? I inquired. She shook her head again, this time with a mouthful of peanut butter and jelly. I knew I couldn't just leave her alone in her apartment. If I called the police without a plan, they might place her in foster care quickly, and potentially take her away from her mother if they doubted her ability to care for Maddie, which I was beginning to question myself. How about we go to your apartment and leave a note for your mommy, telling her that we're at my place. She can call me when she gets home and I'll bring you back to her. I could see her thinking hard about this. Although it meant breaking one of her mother's rules, with her mother not coming home, I suspected she didn't want to spend the day alone in her apartment. She eventually nodded in agreement. After packing up my belongings and putting them in my car, we first went to her apartment. We didn't actually gather much from Maddie's place because, simply put, there wasn't much to gather. The few clothes she had were either being worn or were in the pile of dirty laundry waiting to be washed. I told her we would stop somewhere, and I'd buy her a few things, including a new toothbrush and hairbrush. She gave me a sad smile. I left a note with my name and number on the small kitchen table, and then we went out to get some items for Maddie. I let her choose a few tops, pairs of jeans, as well as some underwear and socks at a nearby Dollar General. She seemed genuinely excited, though I was concerned about what I would do if her mother didn't return soon. We spent time watching cartoons and the Disney Channel. I made lunch and dinner for us, and then at 9 p.m. I put her to bed in my spare room on the sofa. I planned to take a personal day off work the next day to sort things out. On Monday, Maddie and I waited until after lunch to return to her apartment, but there was no sign that anyone had been there since we left the day before. I snooped around a bit and found a drawer in her mother's chest of drawers with some paperwork. Among the documents was Maddie's birth certificate, which notably didn't list a father's name. Her mother's name was Fiona Ruiz. I took the birth certificate along with a photo of Maddie and her mother. The photo, probably taken when Maddie was about 2, showed her as a tiny toddler. She and her mother were hugging for the camera. Fiona, appearing to be in her mid-20s, had the same long, curly brown hair as Maddie. Both were smiling for the picture, but while Fiona was undeniably beautiful, her eyes had a tired, sad quality. I wondered if that look had deepened over the years. Maddie watched me go through her mother's things with careful attention. I tried to make small talk and explained that I was searching for anything that could help us locate her mother. She seemed to accept that. When we returned to my apartment, I turned on the TV to the Disney Channel to settle Maddie in, then went to my bedroom, called the police, and reported Fiona Ruiz as missing. I didn't have much information to give the officer who answered the call, mainly just my concern that something must have happened to her for her to leave her child alone. "And is the child alone in the apartment now, sir?" the officer asked. "No, she's with me. I'm as close a friend as she has. I'll be happy to keep her with me until this is sorted out. If you could do that until Child Services gets in touch, it would be greatly appreciated." I worried that Maddie might end up in foster care, as I had heard negative things about the system from people I knew who had been in it. I knew I could provide for her if given the chance. As I pondered this, I remembered that my boss's wife, Darlene, had influential contacts in social services. Maybe I could ask for a favor. I had a good relationship with my boss. I had worked for him for 20 years and had done excellent work for his company. We got along well personally, too, and he and his wife had supported me during my divorce. Darlene Laster arrived at my apartment about 20 minutes after I spoke with her husband. She said she wanted to make a new friend. I introduced her to Maddie, and within 5 minutes, Darlene had Maddie completely charmed, and the feeling was mutual. When she left an hour later, she gave me a hug and promised to do everything she could to ensure Maddie stayed with me. Later that day, 2 police officers visited my apartment. They didn't seem very hopeful about finding Fiona Ruiz. I gave them a copy of the photo of Maddie and her mother. I returned to work on Tuesday and brought Maddie along, enrolling her in our company's daycare. Darlene had arranged this about 15 years ago. I hadn't used it for my own kids since Tracy stayed home until they were old enough to manage after school, but it turned out to be a lifesaver now that I'm a single dad. Until school starts, I'll take Maddie to work with me in the morning, have lunch with her at noon, and bring her home in the evening. Overall, it's a pretty convenient arrangement. Having Maddie with me eased the pain of my own kids distancing themselves. I seldom saw them, and when I did, it was usually just for a meal at a local restaurant. I didn't bring Maddie along when I met with them, leaving her with a neighbor, Mrs. Olivares, so they wouldn't have to deal with her while expressing their attitude towards me. Maddie was a refreshing change for me. She and her mother rarely ventured outside their home due to financial constraints, so many of the things we did together were novel experiences for her. When we first dined at a real restaurant, not just a fast food place like McDonald's, she was enchanted as if she had just landed from another world. A simple outing to the park, followed by a pretzel and a soda after she played, felt to her like a high tea experience. After our first such outing, she smiled for an entire week, and I couldn't stop grinning either, just from hearing her excited reactions. She began teaching me Spanish. Being bilingual, she found my mix-ups of words and phrases hilariously amusing. I once accidentally ordered a horse and a Coke at McDonald's, and her laughter was so intense it brought her to tears. Her innocent assumption that everyone spoke 2 languages made her amusement even more endearing. I kept Maddie enrolled in her first-grade school because it was the simplest solution for the school system. With her birth certificate in hand, there were no issues when I listed myself as her contact and my apartment as her address. I never received any updates from the police regarding Maddie's mother or from social services about potential foster care arrangements. Either Darlene had some powerful connections on my behalf, or the city simply had too many cases to address ours promptly. My cooking skills also improved with Maddie's stay. Ordering pizza and beer was no longer an option, so we started watching cooking shows on the Food Channel and working together in the kitchen. Unlike my experience with my own kids, since Tracy was an excellent cook, I was learning and enjoying new culinary skills with Maddie. We had a blast cooking together. Our life wasn't without its challenges and disagreements, just like any other family. But after a little over a year together, Maddie and I had forged our own version of a family. This became especially clear at Maddie's school open house at the start of 3rd grade. One evening, while walking down the hallway, one of Maddie's friends introduced her parents as my mom and dad, and Maddie introduced me as her dad. I had never thought of our relationship in those terms, and hearing her call me her dad nearly brought me to tears from joy. I choked up and got misty-eyed, apologizing to the Reynoldses for my brief silence, claiming I had something caught in my throat. Maddie noticed, squeezed my hand, and from that moment on, she never called me Alex again. Nothing could have made me happier. I was having such a great time being a parent again that I didn't even realize it had been over 2 years since I'd been on a date until Maddie brought it up one day at the grocery store. We were moving up and down the aisles, filling our cart with items from our shopping list, when we passed a petite woman in the produce section. I didn't think much of it, but Maddie did a double take as we walked by. "Wow, Dad, that woman is really pretty. You should ask her out," Maddie said. I was focused on the shopping list when she made the comment, so I stopped the cart and took a good look at the woman we had just passed. She was stunning. At that moment, she looked up at me and we exchanged an awkward smile. "Aren't you going to say something to her, Dad?" Maddie asked, watching us. I felt like disappearing into the floor, but I figured I might as well give it a shot. So, I took a deep breath and approached her. "Hi, I'm Alex. This is Maddie. As you just heard, Maddie thinks I should ask you out or something," I said, fumbling. "What do you think?" she asked, looking directly into my eyes with a dazzling smile. "Ugh." I was completely captivated. Her caramel-colored skin, radiant smile, and striking features were irresistible. She appeared to be about 5 feet 2 inches, 110 pounds, maybe around 35 years old, and despite the light jacket she wore, she had a lovely figure. I noticed she didn't have a ring on her left hand. I wondered if Maddie had seen that. "Would you like to have dinner with us sometime? All 3 of us. Or just the 2 of us, if you prefer." "Muy suavemente, Romeo," Maddie teased in Spanish. "That was smooth, getting your daughter to find single women for you," the woman said, making me blush deeply. "No, honestly, this wasn't a setup. I'd never do that." "Really," I assured her. "Yeah, right, Romeo, I'm not buying it. But yes, I'd like that. Dinner with both of you sounds great. I'm Cherry Roberts, by the way." "Seriously? It was that easy?" "Damn, I should have been using my kid for this ages ago," I said, and we both laughed. We set up a date for the following Saturday. She mentioned she liked Italian food, and Maddie and I had some great recipes. After exchanging phone numbers and giving her my address, Maddie and I continued shopping. As we turned the corner, Maddie and I fist bumped. "Yeah, no setup, right," she called after us. The next Saturday finally arrived. It felt like the days dragged on forever. After cleaning the apartment, Maddie and I got to work making homemade lasagna, garlic breadsticks, salad, and tortoni for dessert. Cooking helped soothe my nerves. Honestly, I was as jittery as a cat. After all, it had been over 20 years since my last date. And then it hit me, hard. It had been 2 decades since my last date. Of course, those dates had all been with Tracy, and I had to really rack my brain to remember who I dated before Tracy and I got together. I think it might have been Marianne Rizzo. The last I heard, she married the next guy she dated after me. I wondered if they're still together or if her marriage followed the same path as mine. "Easy, boy," I said to myself. "It's just a date. Just a damn date. And you're already thinking about marriage." It wasn't just me who seemed excited. Maddie was energized too. She was right by my side helping with the cleaning and cooking. I hadn't realized it, but Cherry would be our first visitor to the apartment who wasn't Mrs. Olivars or under 10 years old. Dinner went well, I thought. It was a bit nerve-wracking at first, but having an 8-year-old around made for a great icebreaker. My mom wasn't married either. "Have you ever been married, Cherry?" she asked, out of the blue, when I brought Cherry a glass of Galliano shortly after she arrived. Cherry blushed almost as much as I did at the question. She looked Maddie in the eyes and softly replied, "I used to be married to a wonderful man, baby." But that was in the past. I noticed a look of sadness and then pain cross her face as she answered. "Dad was married too, and he has 2 other children besides me," Maddie added. At that point, I decided to give Cherry a brief summary of my marriage, divorce, and how I became Maddie's dad. She listened quietly, her expression stoic. Both she and Maddie looked a bit teary when I reached the part about Maddie's mother not coming back home. However, Maddie quickly recovered and asked Cherry about her name. "That's a cool name, Cherry. I bet your parents were fun when you were a kid." "Well, there's a funny story behind that," Cherry replied. "My real name is Marcella, but people used to call me Chella for short. One day, while we were at the grocery store, my younger brother saw a box of Sella chocolate-covered cherries and started calling me Cherry. The name stuck, and now everyone calls me that. It suits you much better than Marcella, I chimed in. I imagine Marcella would have thick, dark-rimmed glasses, big hands, and a solid build. Ooh, that's harsh, Cherry laughed. You're never allowed to call me by my given name. Cherry stayed with us until Maddie's bedtime at 9. When it was time for her to leave, she mentioned that she had enjoyed herself and suggested we meet at her apartment next time. I hope she meant it and wasn't just being polite. She gave me a quick kiss on the lips as she left. For a moment I thought I detected a hint of arousal, but it had been so long that I might have been imagining it. I like her, Dad. I think she'd be a good fit for us, Maddie said after I closed the door. I had to admit to myself that the kid might be right so far. We had family date nights for 5 Saturdays in a row, and I think we all liked them. However, I felt it was important to spend time face-to-face to see if it had potential. When I told Maddie that I was inviting Cherry to dinner, just the two of us, and that she would spend the evening with Mrs. Olivares, she took the news well. Of course, I didn't want to leave Maddie alone at home like her mother did, although I would never criticize Maddie's mom in front of her. Leaving an 8-year-old girl alone at home while I go on a date was not something I would do. Besides, both Maddie and I knew that the last time she was alone, everything went wrong. I booked a table at a nice steakhouse for our first one-on-one date, as Maddie called it. I expected the evening to be a different atmosphere when I drove up to Cherry's house to pick her up. She was wearing a somewhat form-fitting silk dress that beautifully emphasized her height and was short enough to make her legs seem longer. She put on a little more makeup than usual and put on a new, spicier perfume that wasn't too overwhelming. Damn, I forgot to take my stick. How am I going to fight off all the other men? If you think that your eloquent language will achieve something, maybe you're right, she laughed. We enjoyed a delicious dinner and had an exciting adult conversation without Maddie, although it was a little strange that she wasn't with me. You miss her right now, don't you? Cherry asked, looking me straight in the eye. Partly, I admitted. Apart from studying and working, we are always together, and I would not like it to be any other way. You really miss those days, don't you? She asked. It's terrible. Although not with the attitude I had after leaving. I know they're just kids, but they don't even try to understand my point of view. My ex really turned them against me. You seem to get along great with kids, I said. If you don't mind me asking, why haven't you ever had any? No, I don't mind. We thought about it, but then I made the worst decision of my life. I disrespected my husband and cheated on him for the thrill. I was a fool and broke the heart of the only person I cared about the most. It's a mistake I'll never make again if I ever get another chance to love someone like that. Cherry's voice faltered as she reached the end of her sentence, but I caught every word of her barely audible whisper. Her eyes brimmed with tears, which she struggled to blink away. I handed her my napkin, and she delicately dabbed at her eyes. I'm sorry if I made you revisit something you'd rather avoid, I said. I've never really talked about this with anyone before, she admitted. Not even my parents. I'm too ashamed of myself. Let's put aside the heavy conversation for now, I suggested. How about we leave this place and see if you've got any moves on the dance floor, Missy? Missy? How old do you think I am? 12. Actually, I guessed 35, but since I'm 44, you're a kid to me, I replied. Really, 35? She sounded pleased. I'm 42. I was married for 12 years and divorced for 9. You're quite flattering to a girl's ego, sir. No way you're just 2 years younger than me. I feel like I could almost be your older brother, I chuckled. I settled the bill and we headed to a dance club that Tracy and I used to frequent. While I'm no Fred Astaire, I took some dance lessons because Tracy enjoyed dancing. I quickly learned that sitting on the sidelines while your wife dances with other men isn't very enjoyable. Cherry was as graceful as she was attractive. We danced to a mix of slow and fast music for about 30 minutes before I needed a break. Cherry seemed like she could have kept going, but she joined me off the floor, and we claimed a stand-up table. I went to the bar, and as soon as I left, the first opportunistic guy swooped in. I watched discreetly from the corner of my eye. Cherry smiled and laughed. He must have been somewhat amusing, but she stayed at the table. I was more than a little pleased. When I handed Cherry her margarita, she took a sip. Soon enough, another guy, about 25, approached. He acknowledged me, but still asked Cherry if she wanted to dance. "Excuse me, Slick, but the lady is with me. I don't appreciate being disrespected, especially by someone younger." I spoke quietly but firmly, maintaining a smile that probably didn't reach my eyes. The kid seemed to realize he had overstepped. "Sorry, man, I didn't know you two were together," he mumbled before slipping away. We finished our drinks and returned to the dance floor for another 30 minutes. At one point, another guy tried to intervene, but was polite enough to ask me first. When I said no, he accepted it with dignity, held out his hand and said, "I can't blame the guy for trying. She's great." We went back to our table and had another glass. When we were finishing, another guy came up and asked if he could dance with Cherry. I was tired, but if she still wanted to dance, I was ready to let her go. She shook her head, and I told him the bad news. I drove her home, and she invited me to come in for a while. It was only 10:30, so I agreed. We had a glass of wine and had a nice chat for another hour. When I got up to leave, she followed my example. I wasn't sure what to do, and I must have looked unsure because she gave me a sweet laugh that I was really starting to like. I blushed deeply, and she realized that I was nervous. "Don't worry, Alex, we're not in a hurry, are we?" she cooed to me. 2 weeks later, in my bedroom, I ended my 2-year dry spell. I didn't last long, but Cherry seemed to be fine with it, because I got my way first. Tracy has always said that I am excellent at this, and it is true that they say that you should not forget how to ride a bike. Cherry really knows how to have fun. Although it wasn't planned, Cherry stayed the night, snuggling up to me most of the time. When we got up for breakfast, she found a white shirt in my closet that covered the essentials. We went to the kitchen, where we were joined by Maddie, who screamed in surprise when she saw Cherry. She rushed over to Cherry, almost knocking her down, and hugged her enthusiastically. They both seemed genuinely happy to see each other. It was almost stunningly cute, and I rolled my eyes at the scene. "Pancakes! Pancakes!" they shouted in unison. "Pancakes with chocolate chips," I replied. 6 months later, Cherry moved in with us for good, and we became a modern version of the Brady Bunch. Even though I was still paying alimony and child support, I was doing well financially, and Cherry had a stable job at an accounting firm, so she was doing well too. Maddie didn't go without, though she didn't ask for much. I guess when you grow up without a lot, even small things seem like plenty. It's all relative, I suppose. While we might have felt like a modern-day Brady Bunch, in reality, we probably looked more like a modern-day odd couple, or in this case, an odd trio. We were black, white, and Hispanic, and each of us had a different last name. Some of that got sorted out when I enrolled Maddie in 4th grade, that fall. I wrote her name as Maddie Ruiz Rogers on the registration form. She was standing next to me when I did, and her eyes widened as soon as she saw it. She didn't say anything until we left the school, and then she practically burst with excitement. "I can be a Rogers like you? Really?" she squealed. "Not officially, at least not for a few more years," I replied. "But according to Rogers' rules, you're eligible to join the club." I even made air quotes when I said Rogers' rules, but Maddie wasn't fazed at all. She jumped into my arms, showering me with kisses. After about 30 seconds of celebrating, she pulled back and gave me a thoughtful look. I wasn't sure what to expect until she finally spoke. "So, when does Cherry get to become a Rogers?" she asked. "That's a great question," I said. "I'm going to have to think about that one." And I really did follow through. In fact, on the 1-year anniversary of our first date, I arranged for Maddie to stay with Mrs. Olivares while I headed to the jeweler after work, the same one I'd used before when buying gifts for Tracy. Cherry mentioned she'd be home late and would get her own dinner, so I figured I had a few hours to pick out the perfect ring. Just after 6, I left Jean Horowitz Jewelers, having worked with Jean's daughter, Jolene, to design a custom engagement ring. I had called in a pizza order for Maddie, Mrs. Olivares, and myself, and made my way to my favorite pizza spot in a small shopping plaza. As I was about to step out of my car, I glanced over at a trendy little restaurant nearby. That's when my world collapsed for the second time. Walking into the restaurant, hand in hand with a handsome man in his 40s, was Cherry. She looked animated, happy, and full of life. I sat there, frozen, unable to move, breathe, or even think. I'm not sure how long I sat in the car before realizing I hadn't taken a breath in a while and was close to passing out. I inhaled deeply, then again. I knew I had to get Maddie her dinner, so I went inside, picked up the pizza, and drove home in a daze. The rest of the evening is a blur, at least until Cherry walked in around 8. She was still glowing, full of energy as she waltzed through the door. "Hey, you'll never guess who I ran into tonight. My brother John showed up in town without telling me, and after I finished work he took me out for dinner. I thought since you guys were getting pizza, it'd be fine for me to grab a meal with him." She stopped talking as soon as she saw the expression on my face. "That's the story you're sticking with?" I asked quietly. Cherry's face fell as she replayed what I had said in her mind. "You went to Salvatore's for pizza tonight, and you saw me with him, didn't you? And now, you think—" "You son of a bitch!" she shouted at me. I was taken aback. I'd been expecting guilt or maybe an apology. Not an attack. Must be some new way to apologize, I thought to myself. Cherry had never cursed at me before, but now I was starting to see why she might. "You don't even trust me enough to give me the benefit of the doubt, you bastard. I know I lost my husband because I cheated on him. I told you everything, held nothing back, and I promised I'd never make that mistake again. I understand your ex-wife left you with trust issues, but that's something between you and her. Don't you dare disrespect me like that again, or I'll be gone before you know it." Mrs. Olivares had apparently let herself out quietly when Cherry blew up, and I saw Maddie slip away to her room. I wished the couch I was sitting on would swallow me whole, but no such luck. "You're right," I said softly. "I let the mistrust Tracy left in me affect you. You're not her, and if I can't see that, then that's on me. I don't deserve you." I hadn't intended to tell her about the ring just yet, but after messing up so badly, I had to play my best hand. She was glaring at me, and if looks could kill, I wouldn't be standing here anymore. "So, I realize this is probably the worst timing, but I need to show you how much you mean to me. Give me your left hand." She walked over slowly and held out her hand, palm up. I gently turned it palm down and wrapped a piece of paper around her ring finger, securing it with a rubber band I had in my pocket. She looked completely confused. "What the?" she muttered as she slid the paper off, unfolded it, and started reading. "You sneaky jerk," she shrieked. "Are you serious?" Cherry then gave me the most passionate kiss I've ever experienced. Better than anything I'd ever shared with Tracy. When we pulled apart, she called out for Maddie to come out of her room. "Look, baby, look," Cherry said, holding up the receipt for the ring. "I'm going to be a Rogers too." The squeals of joy from the two of them were so high-pitched that it was hard for me to bear, but I managed to keep my hearing intact as they jumped around the room. Once they calmed down, Cherry hit a button on her phone and announced, "You'd better get over here and meet your soon-to-be brother-in-law." Maddie brought Mrs. Oliveras back so Cherry could proudly show off her ring, and the apartment was still buzzing with excitement when Cherry's brother arrived. He was just as handsome as Cherry was beautiful, and as I glanced at him again, I couldn't help but be thankful that he was her brother, not a rival like I had once feared. We shook hands as Cherry introduced us, but then he pulled me into a tight bear hug. "Shaking hands is for friends," he said, "and while I do want us to be friends, hugs are for family. Plus, they serve as a reminder that if you ever hurt her, I'll squeeze the life out of you. Got it?" He tightened his grip just a bit more at the last part, making it a little hard to breathe. I got the message loud and clear. "Uh-huh," I managed to whisper back. Cherry briefly explained what led to me giving her the ring. He looked at me with mock surprise, at least I think it was, and said he was surprised I was still alive. "She gave you that deadly laser stare, didn't she?" John asked. "Yeah, she's taken down people with that look." Maddie and Mrs. Oliveras both chimed in, saying they were smart enough to leave the room whenever they saw that look. Then he turned to Maddie, sized her up, and said, "So this is the famous Maddie Rogers. I've always wanted nieces and nephews. I think you'll fit the bill just fine." Maddie smiled shyly at first, but her face lit up like a sunny day. "Does this mean I get to call you Mom now?" she asked Cherry. Cherry didn't say a word, as tears filled her eyes. She reached for Maddie, and they stood there, hugging, both crying for their own reasons. Even with Darlene's help, the state made us wait until Maddie was 16 before we could legally adopt her. At that point, she could have filed for emancipation and gone off on her own, but neither Cherry nor I worried about that. All the state did was legitimize the family bond that Maddie, Cherry, and I had already built long ago. Family isn't just about blood or legalities. And then, out of the blue, I hadn't heard from either of my kids since our last meeting over 6 years ago, so I was more than a little surprised when it was Haley on the other end of the line. Without checking the caller ID, I answered as usual, "Alex Rogers." "Dad, it's me, Haley," she said quickly. "Please don't hang up." "Relax, kiddo. I'd never hang up on you or your brother. Is something wrong?" "No, Dad. Everything's fine. Actually, everything's great. I'm getting married next month, and I want to invite you to the wedding." I guess I was more shocked than anything. This was my little girl, and yet I was so disconnected from her life that I hadn't even met the man she was about to marry in just a month. The last time I spoke to my kids was right after Ethan's 16th birthday. We had gone to his favorite restaurant to celebrate. As usual, neither of them was very talkative, despite my attempts to engage them. Then, right after we ordered dessert, Ethan finally said it. "Dad, I'm 16 now, and the court-ordered visits are over. Haley and I don't have to see you anymore if we don't want to. And we've talked about it, and we don't want to. You left us to protect your stupid pride. Well, you can take your pride and shove it." I had to give it to my son. He was calm. He didn't raise his voice, though he couldn't look me in the eye as he spoke. Haley, for her part, kept looking back and forth between Ethan and me. I sighed, having anticipated this day. This had Tracy's fingerprints all over it. I assume you understand what wedding vows are and that your mother didn't just break ours, she threw them in my face. But she's managed to convince both of you that I'm the villain here, and nothing I say will change your minds. To me, breaking our vows isn't something I could just overlook, like crashing the family car. It cuts to my core. I knew leaving would hurt you both, but staying would have been worse because it would have crushed my soul and made me less of the man I am. Eventually, you'd have realized that once you'd matured and seen the world for what it really is. This was your mother's mistake, and she's done a great job shifting the blame to me. But I won't accept it. If this is what you both want— Dad? Dad, Haley said, snapping me back to reality. Aren't you coming? Of course, Haley. I've even saved money for this day, I replied. You don't need to worry about money, Dad. Bob's got it covered. Bob? I asked. Let me guess. You're talking about Robert Goldstein III, right? Her voice grew slightly annoyed before softening into one of pity. Apparently you didn't know. Mom married Bob about 6 years ago after we stopped seeing you, she said. So the guy ruins my marriage, takes away my relationship with my kids, nearly bankrupts me, and then marries my ex-wife. And it was all about my pride, Haley. Anytime my son wants to apologize. Don't be like that, Dad. I'm not inviting you to cause drama. You won't be giving me away or sitting up front with the family. I just want you to be there, okay? All right, Haley, on one condition. I bring my family. Your family? Yeah. Even someone like me gets to have a family. I've got a wonderful wife and a fantastic daughter. You'd like them both if you spent some time with them. Haley seemed taken aback. I'd never told her or Ethan about Cherry and Maddie. Frankly, I didn't want their mom to know. You have another kid? Does she know about me and Ethan? She asked, sounding almost dazed. Maddie's 16, she's adopted. We've been together for 9 years now. I pretty much found her on the streets. She knows all about you two, about what we used to have and what we don't have anymore. She's full of life and fun. She's had her struggles too, and we helped each other through a really tough time. It almost felt meant to be. Well, I look forward to meeting the rest of the family, Haley said, recovering from her surprise. The wedding was on a Saturday evening in a fairly upscale venue, fitting for the daughter of a successful lawyer. I had to give Bob credit. He didn't spare any expense for his stepdaughter. The ceremony took place in a beautiful old church in the city. The girls and I timed our arrival, so we got there just before it started and sat in the back row. Yes, I saw old friends and relatives, but arriving late meant we avoided having to socialize beforehand. When Haley and Mark led the procession out of the church, Haley blew me a kiss. We made it to the reception in plenty of time to grab a table toward the back of the hall, though I realized it wasn't really fair to Cherry and Maddie. They'd both put effort into looking great. Cherry had a stylish intimacy outfit, and Maddie, wearing full makeup for the first time, looked like a 16-year-old pretending to be 21, every dad's worst fear. But they both respected my choice without complaining, even when I went to the bar to get wine for Cherry and me, and a Coke for Maddie. As I expected, old friends came by to catch up once they spotted me. Tracy's parents, Rhonda and William, also stopped by. Rhonda started crying the moment she leaned in for a kiss, and William gave me a more heartfelt hug than when I'd been married to their daughter. I introduced them to Cherry and Maddie. Both Rhonda and Bill seemed a bit uncomfortable, which I understood, given I'd been married to their daughter for 18 years. Since I hadn't contributed to the event in any way, It didn't seem right for me to move around the room and mingle, so we mostly stayed at the table while people came over to us. But I wasn't oblivious. I saw the reactions from people who knew me, especially from the wives of old friends. It was like they thought I'd shown up with a trophy wife, Cherry, a stunning black woman, and Maddie, my little Hispanic princess. Right on cue, Tracy and Bob, our hosts, appeared. After being married to someone for nearly 20 years, you learn to pick up on every detail of their personality. From the moment Tracy saw Cherry, I knew she didn't like her. Was Cherry too black for her? Possibly. Was Cherry too beautiful? Probably. Was Cherry too fit, with a flat stomach and great legs, looking at least 10 years younger than her age? Definitely. And with all of that going for her, was she with the one man in the room Tracy wished she wasn't? Absolutely. With everything on her mind about Cherry, Tracy hardly noticed that this was the first time in about 10 years that we'd been this close. It was like she only snapped back to reality when I leaned in and kissed her on the cheek as a greeting. "Oh, Alex, I'm sorry. I was having a little trouble walking in these new heels," she said, apologizing. "No worries, babe. You look amazing," I lied. "Come on, let's meet the new family." I introduced Cherry, Maddie, Tracy, and Bob, giving Bob as warm a handshake as I could manage while jokingly calling him the reason for my eventual good fortune. Everyone winced a little at that, except for Maddie, who shot me a sly look and squeezed my left elbow. I think I've mentioned how perceptive she is. We made small talk for about 5 minutes without really saying much before Tracy and Bob moved on, and the bride and her new husband came over. As they left, Maddie gave me a little shake of her head, clearly as unenthused about meeting them as I was about introducing them. My other daughter, the bride, greeted me with far more warmth than I expected. She hugged me tight for a long time and started crying, while her new husband, Cherry, and Maddie stood quietly by. I was totally caught off guard and didn't know what to say when she finally let go. "I'm so sorry, Dad, for everything," she said through her tears. "I never really understood what you were going through until I said my vows a couple of hours ago. Right in the middle of my vows, it hit me like a ton of bricks. What you must have felt when Mom cheated and broke her vows. I didn't get it before. I blamed you and your pride, just like Ethan did. But now I completely understand. You were absolutely right to do what you did, and she was completely wrong, not only for what she did, but for trying to shift the blame onto you. How can I ever make up for the hurt that Ethan and I caused you?" A huge lump formed in my throat. I hadn't cried since I tore cartilage in my knee playing football back in 10th grade, but I came dangerously close standing there, surrounded by family. "How about starting by introducing me to this handsome guy you just married, and then giving me the honor of a dance?" I replied. "Oh, of course," she said, slightly flustered. "You haven't met the man of my dreams. Mark Westinghouse. Meet Alex Rogers, my real dad, and your other father-in-law." We shook hands earnestly, and I fulfilled my fatherly duty by warning him about what would happen if he ever hurt my daughter. I introduced him and Haley to Cherry and Maddie, and as everyone was getting acquainted, the band started playing. "Daddy?" Haley asked, tilting her head toward the dance floor. "With pleasure," I said, taking her arm. The crowd, which had grown louder when Haley welcomed me, became even more animated as I led her to the dance floor. I realized I was beginning to steal the show from Tracy and Bob, but I had years to make up for. The band was playing what I call kid music, which I'm not fond of, but thanks to being married to a goddess who loves dancing, I knew how to move to it. Haley was stunned to see her newly reconnected father as such a well-rounded man, and we ended up staying on the dance floor for 2 songs. By then, Most of the crowd had gathered around us. When the second song ended, Haley hugged me tightly. The crowd cheered, and Cherry and Maddie were beaming at me. I took both of their hands and pulled them onto the dance floor, and the three of us danced while everyone else joined in. "Look at you, Mr. Rhythm," Cherry whispered in my ear as she came closer. "Who knew giving a daughter away could be this much fun?" I said to her, then quickly turned to Maddie. "That being said, let's hold off a few more years before the next one. I'm not sure my heart can handle all this excitement." "Spin me, old man," Maddie teased with a smile. The three of us stayed on the dance floor for 6 more songs. After that, I left the girls, headed to the bar for a Jack on the Rocks, and sat down at my table to take a break. While watching Cherry and Maddie having a blast on the dance floor, I didn't notice Tracy walk up and sit next to me. She touched my shoulder, and I immediately knew who it was. "This should have been our day, not mine and Bob's," Tracy whispered in my ear. "You threw away 18 good years, for what? Clearly you didn't love me enough." I didn't turn to look at her. "Number, you didn't love me enough not to do it, especially when I told you what would happen if you did. You didn't care enough about me or respect me. But hey, you ended up with Bob, and he's quite a catch. I ended up with Cherry and Maddie. Like the Rolling Stones said, you can't always get what you want. But if you try, you just might find you get what you need. You were a jerk back then, and you're still a jerk now. Maybe, but I'm a happy jerk who's never lost any sleep over your poor choices. And no, I wasn't expecting an apology. I'm fine." Ethan came back into my life a few years ago when he got serious with a woman. Turns out fidelity is easier to grasp when you've got something at stake. He called me out of nowhere and said we needed to talk, so I invited him over to the apartment. When I opened the door, he was holding a bottle of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey. "Haley says you're into this stuff, and she figured I should bring it as a peace offering," he said as I welcomed him inside. We had only spoken briefly at Haley's wedding, and even then, things were uncertain between us. That was over 2 years ago. Since then, Haley and I had made amends, but you and I hadn't yet. So I proposed to my girlfriend, Sasha, and it made me think about you and Mom. For a couple of years now, Haley's been telling me that you were the one wronged, not Mom. But I never really understood it until Sasha and I had a serious conversation about our views on fidelity. I'm sorry, Dad. I've been blind to it all. I see it now. I just didn't want to resent Mom. I never asked you or Haley to take sides, I replied. I just wanted you both to understand why I had to leave, why I needed to leave. Ethan and I spent the next few hours talking, working through a bottle of whiskey as we did. Cherry made us a wonderful dinner, and the 4 of us caught up with each other. Ethan ended up crashing on the sofa in the living room because Cherry wouldn't let him drive after we finished off the bottle. For this wedding, Cherry, Maddie, and I were seated at the groom's family table, along with a pregnant Haley, her husband Mark, and our first grandchild, 2-year-old Brent, who was sitting next to Tracy. At least having Brent there would keep Tracy from feeling too left out, now that she was on her own. Bob had dumped her for a trophy wife about a year ago. The kids had kept me updated on Tracy, with bits of information here and there. I had told them it wasn't wise to act as the go-between for Tracy and me. We were both adults, and if either of us wanted to communicate, we could always just pick up the phone. Maddie flew in for the wedding. She's a freshman at Michigan State University, but she didn't want to miss her older brother's wedding, so I flew in with her. She, Ethan, and Haley have such a strong relationship that they can make fun of her by calling her my favorite child. It is very interesting for me to watch the 3 of them together. The argument that parenting is more important than nature seems to suit us, because Maddie and I have an indissoluble bond which even Cherry commented on. Although I wouldn't want what we went through in the beginning to happen to anyone else, adversity has brought us closer together a little more than we might otherwise have been. Adversity probably helped Cherry and me as well. We both know that nothing can ever be taken for granted, and we cherish the time we spend together as we begin to realize our new life as singles. I can tell that it didn't take Cherry long to figure out what an empty nest meant. There are mornings when we both go to work a little tired after a long night of games. When all the usual wedding chores at the reception were settled, Cherry and I went dancing. Maddie also got along with one of Ethan's friends, but before that, Ethan warned her that he should not mess with my father's favorite child, otherwise he would have to pay a lot. I grinned when he said that. I started heading back to the table after about 6 dances, but since Maddie wanted one more with me, I stayed out for another. I noticed that Cherry and Tracy were completely silent despite being close enough to talk. "Can you feel the chill from over there?" Maddie asked, when she got close enough to chat. She was perceptive. When I finally returned to the table, Cherry stood up and joined Maddie on the dance floor. A minute later, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It seemed like we were heading into round 2. "Well, aren't you going to gloat about Bob dumping me?" Tracy asked as she leaned in. "Not my circus, not my monkeys," I replied. "This might surprise you, but I hardly think about you at all. I don't wish you any harm, but I really don't care about your life or what happens with it. We had 18 great years, but that ended years ago. Now I've got a pretty good new life, and I'd rather not spend my time dwelling on the past, or what could have been." As I was talking, I kept an eye on the dance floor, and then I turned to face Tracy. That's when I saw it. The fear. The fear of facing her retirement, years alone. It was just another factor she hadn't considered back then, thinking I was a guaranteed fall guy for her threats to ruin my life in the divorce. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her, but then I realized she'd be trying to crush my soul if the roles were reversed. "You know, I was an asshole then, and I'm still an asshole," I said, standing up from the table and joining my girls on the dance floor.